Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Particle Accelerator Podcast, where we talk to future thinking business leaders about how to grow their team and accelerate their business. I'm here today with Andrew Abela. Andrew, could you introduce yourself?
So I serve as the Dean of the Bush School of Business at Catholic University in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit more about that. What's your area of study and what you're into these days?
Lately, what I've been working on is the role of habits in business. The best-selling books like Atomic Habits, Tiny Habits, and so on, there's a lot of excitement around that. And the excitement is justified in the sense there's good research that shows that if you want to change behaviors in companies, then habits are the best way to do it. Better than education, better than persuasion, better than knowledge. Habits are the surest way to change people's behaviors. That's my focus there.
That's great. I'm super excited to get into that with you today. I'd love to get to know you a little bit better. One of the ways that I do that is to know, how did you make your first dollar as a human being? For me, it was a paper route. How did you make your first dollar as a human?
Babysitting, if you count that. But if I skip over that, my real first paycheck was as an accountant's assistant, just filling out forms. This is a long time ago. So things were manual, no
Yeah.
technology. That was my first paycheck.
That's cool. Did you have a toy or hobby or an experience as a child that you think influenced what you do career-wise today?
Think so, yeah. I was really into wargaming as a kid with building the model tanks and painting them and then setting up these huge setups with my friends and measuring, throwing dice to calculate all the odds of hitting, etc. And I think it gave me an inclination towards strategic thinking. Maybe a bit of a stretch, but I think so.
So you guys created your own RPG, your own role-playing game with your models. That's really cool. I definitely played some G.I. Joe and had those similar setups. It wasn't until computer games where we started getting into the role-playing, like Dungeons and Dragons and the role-playing games. Really cool to hear that you did that, bringing those two worlds together to dictate the outcome of the play. And then final get to know you question is, what quote from a famous person lives in your mind rent free?
Ooh, that's a good one. There's a quote actually that I've had for many years in my head, which is from the Bible, where Christ says, "Enter by the narrow gate." The message being, don't be afraid of the difficult things. It's usually the path of the difficult things that's going to lead to where you need to go. And that's stayed with me, I would say, many years.
Yeah, I love that. I'm in this group called Rise Up Kings, and we have a saying that pain is the path. And if you think about it, even Christ had to experience suffering. So then you can truly say, no man that has ever lived has not experienced suffering. To think that I can live a life that is comfortable, try sitting on the couch for a week from an injury and you have new pains in your body that you never thought you could have. Even if we were to pursue comfort, there would be suffering involved. It's interesting that for some of us, the driver is comfort when it's really an unrealistic goal to find comfort, I guess, at least in this life. We had some discussion before the podcast because your inspiration around habits and business is a little segue. I guess I'll just ask, why all the enthusiasm about habits? I've read Atomic Habits and I'm definitely engaged in this. I have a saying that I've told people for years: the week is for the life you have, and the weekends are for the life you want. The idea is inspiring a self-learning habit on the weekends. For technologists, this is super key. Why all the enthusiasm about habits for you?
Because habits allow you to take what is difficult and make it easier. The repetition carves new pathways in our brains, which then makes doing that thing easier. So even something like courage is a habit. Somebody who feels not very courageous, if they practice doing courageous things, they actually become courageous. It actually becomes easier to be courageous. So you can change any human life by developing the right habits. And I think that's huge.
I got bit by this trend of the ice bath. So I have an ice bath
Mhm.
at home, and this habit of stepping into something that my body doesn't like has made it easier to step in other things that my body doesn't like. And I was at an event 2 weeks ago where we had a competition. It was man to man and nail boards were involved. But I ended up standing on nail boards with a 10-pound weight above my head for 20 minutes. I was victorious in the battle. I don't know if I could have done that without some regular practice of doing something painful and convincing myself that while it's painful, it's going to be okay. the long term is not impacted by my short term discomfort. There may not have been an ROI on standing on nail boards for 20 minutes other than the pride I feel about being able to accomplish it,
Yeah.
which is significant. But the reality is that it had no long term downside. I no longer feel pain in my feet after 20 minutes of being off the nail boards. I'm good.
Because you have, in various ways, developed this muscle, this particular habit we actually call courage. You do that by the ice bath, by public speaking, by playing football. Anything you do that's physically or mentally uncomfortable, but you do it anyway, makes you able to take on the next challenge more easily. It was easier for you to win that challenge because of the ice bath than it would. You might have still won, but it would have been less easy if you hadn't been in the habit of taking the ice baths.
Yeah. So, like this practice of doing hard things, not necessarily because they give you an immediate gratification. I'm interested in what you think. So, I've always thought that religions and governments, they've been trying to leverage identity against us to control us for a long time. Identity is this tool. I've found that when I reclaim identity as a tool, I'm a man, I do hard things is an affirmation that I have, right? So if I'm affirming that my identity is I'm a 5:30 man, I get up at 5:30, I work out every day, that's the kind of man I am. If I'm wiring that to my identity, then the habits are just reinforcing who I believe that I am.
Yeah, it's a virtuous cycle. The identity reinforces the habits, which reinforce the identity. If you
Yes.
tried to have the identity, but then you never woke up at 5:30, it would be hard to maintain that identity. But once you're in the habit of getting up at 5:30, then the identity is evident to you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure which happens. I think the identity of this is who I say I am. So now I need to live in alignment with that. If I were to say that I'm a 5:30 man, but I don't wake up at 5:30, I think that gap between who I say I am and what I'm actually doing is often called shame. And that gap of shame, do you want to live in a life of shame or do you want to live in a life of curiosity as to why am I saying one thing and doing another? And how can I close that gap? And so that curiosity of, wait a minute, why didn't I wake up at 5:30? If I say I'm a 5:30 man, why didn't I do it? What is it that I need to address? I'm not sure if that's coming up in your study, but a daily thing with me is, are the results matching who I say I am?
It's definitely, I think, a both and. There's like one feeding the other. Yeah, for sure.
This is exciting. I don't know that I was expecting this because this is so core to my personal development. What's the relevance of habits to technology that you're finding?
I go in a slightly different direction than most books and writings on habits. Most focus on habits we have in common with animals. Most habit focus is on sleep, when to wake up, on food, diet, and on exercise. Animals sleep, they eat, they move around. I am focused more on the habits that make us distinctively human, that are different from animals, because I think that's really important. If you want to be a successful human, eating is important, sleep is important, exercise is important. They make us good animals. You want to, at minimum, be a successful animal, but then you need to go beyond that and be a successful human.
What kind of habits are you seeing, especially in this area of technology? What are we really talking about there? I'm not quite understanding.
So, what I think is that human beings do that animals don't. First, we think. We have the ability to think, make decisions. Animals just follow their instincts. The second thing we do as humans is we act, we take action, which is different from movement, right? Because action is intentional. I do something for a purpose of something else. Animals, again, just following instincts, moving around. The third is we have emotions or feelings. Now, if you have dogs or cats, you think they have emotions too, especially cats, right? But they're very simple. Whereas we human beings, our emotional lives are very deep, right? They're very significant to how we live. Anyone who's married would know that. The other person's emotions are really critical, as are your own. And then those emotions, the two fundamental ones are fear and desire. Sometimes people say fear and greed as the big motivators, but that's negative. So I prefer to say fear and desire, but they are the major motivators. Our fears and our desires are what motivate us, hence emotion. So you've got thoughts, actions, fears, desires. The ancient philosophers, ancient Greeks and ancient Romans highlighted 4 habits of excellence that lined up with each of these. So for our thoughts, there was the habit of what they used to call prudence, but that word has lost its meaning. We now call it practical wisdom, which is the habit of making wise decisions. Then there's the habit of justice, the virtue of justice, which is the habit of treating others fairly and with respect. That is the habit that manages all of our actions so that we're successful in life. If we treat people with respect and fairly. For our fears, we already spoke about courage, the habit of moving forward even though you might be afraid. And then the last one is what was classically called temperance, but again, that word has lost its meaning. A better translation now is self-discipline, which is the habit of only following your desires when it makes sense to do so. So let's say you've committed to taking an ice bath and it's part of your identity, and you get in the water and your biggest desire is to jump right out because it's really cold. Self-discipline says, I feel like getting out, but I'm not going to. I'm going to sit here for the amount of time I've committed. So those are the four major habits. They're classically called the cardinal virtues that are distinctively human. You won't find them in an animal. A lion is not courageous. A lion just follows instinct. We sometimes use them to symbolize, but these are the four that are uniquely human. So that's the focus that I pay attention to.
Cool. That's interesting. I have a different thing in my head. The metaphor that I have in my mind is this idea of fruit to root. Fruit is the results or the habits or the behaviors. The trunk are the feelings and emotions. And then the roots is really like the heart's desire. I believe that at least in our body, I'm going to use a Christian metaphor here. So in our flesh, you use the term animal. So in the animal side of us, the part of us that's separate from God, most people have four primary heart attitudes, but in life, they gravitate towards one: fear, anger, foolishness, or despair. And for me, if I don't pay attention to my thoughts, despair is my primary heart attitude. Different friends that I've gotten to know really well may gravitate towards foolishness that manifests in addiction. Fear usually manifests into some kind of control, like they end up having an identity where they're pretty controlling. For despair, it typically manifests in like a victim mindset, like a low power person blaming others. But I feel that in my spirit, in the part that is in touch with God, that's praying regularly, that has spiritual habits, that I find a very polar opposite in my heart's desire. In my spirit, I feel very hopeful. I don't feel despair anymore or victim mindset. I can grab a hold of those thoughts in my spirit, part of me that prays and is engaged with my creator. I feel extremely hopeful. I find a lot of positives about the human condition, human life, how I can influence others, and my power as a man. And then if that's what's happening at the root, I'm transitioning from my animal side to my spiritual side, then my trunk, my feelings, emotions, they start to shift. And then the fruit that's produced is what others can see. They can see that, okay, if I'm not remaining in a victim mindset, then I'm producing better and I have more fruit. So I don't know how that compares to your metaphor, but that idea of shifting from the desires that absent of God, I would most likely gravitate towards to in my relationship with God shifts my whole tree.
It's not inconsistent, I think. Here's another more technology analogy that is actually very different. Yours is more organic with a tree. I like to think of our personalities as having two aspects, which would be analogous to hardware and software in technology. The hardware is the way we are made, and it includes a disposition to fear or despair. Different people are different, but we're kind of born that way. There's no point in trying to change from fear to despair, but it also happens with strengths as well. Some people are more detail-oriented, some are more extroverted. That's the hardware. That's the way you were made. And there's no point in trying to change that. But then the software are the habits I was talking about. For me, the trunk is more the habits. The roots are the hardware. The trunk is the software. Because they're habits, they can be developed and changed. To take a Christian or theological perspective, God's grace gives us the power to build those habits to a high level. And then the fruits are the fruits. So I think that the two things we're saying are actually very similar.
I love that. I love that. As a technologist, I like the hardware software metaphor. I think that's great because where I think that metaphor really helps is that we choose what we want to believe. Like we are conscious humans. And so this idea of meaning, right? The meaning we take from certain stimulus. When my wife pulls up the pillow between us at night and she's trying to get comfortable to fall asleep, the meaning I take of that is rejection. But that meaning is not necessarily true. I haven't communicated anything. My hardware says, I'm just going to resent this moment. I'm going to experience resentment and I'm looking for that signal to anchor my resentment to. Or I can grab a hold of that and go, wait a minute, that meaning is not really true. That's what I'm applying to the situation. And that's a conscious choice if we allow it to be. I think our software can become more attuned to the idea that, hey, we're actually ruining our mind right now. We're creating feelings. And you mentioned earlier neuro pathways.
Yeah.
If every time my wife pulls up that pillow, I choose resentment, then I'm creating a neural pathway that's now just reinforcing resentment rather than understanding or empathy or some other meaning that would allow me to feel better about the situation rather than worse. So good. So you mentioned the habits that make us distinctly human. How is something from ancient Greece relevant to us? I'm guessing that you're studying some of the Stoic.
Exactly.
I'll tell you, I'm a little resistant to this word stoicism, and I'll tell you why. I interpret stoicism as being very dry and hard. I've met men that are dry and hard, and I would call them stoic, but I think I've missed the point on relating that idea to the Stoic philosophers, to ancient Greece. So I think I have it wrong. But I'm wondering what you think, because I always think of the 1950s dad would never be caught being playful with his children. He was a disciplinarian. I have 4 kids, and so if I think of stoic, I don't think of a good dad. I think of the dad that's not willing to bend. Many of my friends are starting to reintroduce this idea of playfulness into their family lives, being down on the floor and playing with the dolls or playing with the Legos. So how have I gotten the idea of ancient Greece and stoicism wrong? And what are you seeing there in your research?
I don't think you have it wrong. I think you are onto something. Ultimately, the ancient Greek program of the habits of excellence, the virtues, didn't pan out because as human beings, I should say a theological perspective, that we just don't have the resources to do it all just by ourselves. We need the help of God, right? What can happen with Stoicism is it becomes joyless. It just becomes a perpetual struggle. But the purpose of the struggle is for a greater joy and a greater success. The resources I use particularly is a philosopher by the name of Thomas Aquinas, who is a medieval Christian philosopher, 12th, 13th century. What he's doing is he's taking the work of the ancient Greeks, adding Christian theology to it, and actually comes up with a beautiful synthesis. For example, he explains that there are different types of self-discipline, different virtues of self-discipline, one of which is actually a virtue or a habit of excellence of playing well, excellence in playing. It has the Greek name is eutrapelia, begins with U. And so eutrapelia is the habit of taking the time to enjoy yourself. And then he has this beautiful line where he says, enjoyment is rest for the soul. His insights are very deep. He says, when our bodies are tired, all we have to do is sit down or lie down and we rest. But when your mind is tired, when your soul is tired, your mind is racing, you go to bed. Sometimes you have trouble even falling asleep, or you're asleep, but you're dreaming. So how do we rest our minds? Aquinas says our minds are at rest when we're playing, doing something that we love for its own sake. It could be playing, watching a good movie, reading a book, playing music, going for a hike, good conversation, good meal, so long as the main purpose is because I like it, because I enjoy it. That's an actual virtue to do that. I think that view is somewhat missing from the Stoics. So I do think your insight is you're onto something there. You mentioned the ancient Greeks, Romans. I think they have something to say that is particularly relevant to us today. What could the Greeks and Romans have to say to us? Here's the analogy. We're getting to a point where AI is able to do more and more things that even super smart human beings used to do for us, right? Ancient Greece had something analogous to that. They didn't have computers, but what they had was a very sophisticated form of slavery, a slavery that was very different from ours. It wasn't race-based like ours was in the US. It wasn't manual labor only focused. You'd have doctors, lawyers, experts of every kind who were enslaved. They were owned as property, but they did very sophisticated things for the society. Obviously, I'm not in any way praising it. It's horrific for one human being to claim to own another. But what we can learn is, what did the free people of Greece and Rome focus on when they had slaves to do everything for them? Not just cook and farm, but take care of them when they were sick, handle their legal issues, handle their business issues. What did they focus on? And the answer is what we talked about before, the virtues, particularly these 4 virtues of being human. Now, you wonder if they were being so human, how come they didn't see the evil they were doing? It's hard to go back and judge 2,000 years ago. But I think the lesson for us is we're coming to a society where technology can do almost everything for us better than we can do it. So what remains for human being? And what remains for human beings are wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. Those are the things where we will always excel and always be better than the machines.
What comes up for me there is I was in a Bible study and I've been in some other men's groups. The other men's groups I'm in, we're tight, we're close, we're vulnerable, we're authentic, we're getting into it. So I go to Bible study at church and people from very different stages in their spiritual knowledge. And in my mind, my meta conversation is, oh, this group isn't like that other group. And so second task for the second class was to write a personal Psalms. So being the technologist that I am, I put a lot of personal and authentic information into ChatGPT and I got out my Psalm. Great Psalm, by the way, edited a little bit to make it my own. We get into the second class and we're going around the circle and people are showing their Psalm. The second guy that goes is emotionally invested in his Psalm. He has trouble getting through it because of the emotion connected to what he's written. And I realized that I had completed the task, but I had missed the point. The point was for me to be emotionally invested to the work. And because of the efficiency that I had gained, my trade-off was that I lost authenticity. That really got me thinking about when to use AI and when to not use it. For me, a personal litmus test is how invested do I want to be to this body of work? So if I'm going to execute my habit of working on my personal mission and goals, I'm going to be very wary about using AI to help me generate those ideas because I can't risk that I'm not emotionally tied to my goals. I can't risk putting AI in my journaling process because I'm going to lose the emotional significance of my journaling process. Folks will find that whenever you use AI, no matter how good it gets, you're going to lose authenticity and an emotional connection to the work product. I've even shared that with some buddies, and any kind of idea of not using AI is frowned upon because it's helping them in all areas. But I also don't want to walk around with a crutch that without the use of AI, I can't be creative or I can't have independent thought because I don't have that brainstorming assistant with me. So there's definitely a trade-off here.
I could totally relate. I published a book last year about what we're talking about. And the name of the book was Super Habits, because the idea is the virtues are like a very special kind of habit. I used AI a lot to help me with the research, but I wrote the whole thing myself. I had to do it that way because I knew it wouldn't be authentic. And then even when it came time to do the audiobook, AI can do a fantastic job of taking text and turn it into an audiobook. I insisted on reading it aloud myself. You can hear the pages turning. You can hear me coughing occasionally because, again, the authenticity, and especially people who listen to it who know me, they know I'm reading it. They would totally know, even if it took my own voice recording and made AI, which you can do, they would have noticed. Where authenticity is necessary, we do it ourselves, supplemented by AI, of course, but ourselves at the heart of it.
Yeah, we're seeing that with AI assisted coding. Some people called it vibe coding. I hate the term, to be honest. I'm not comfortable yet with the idea of vibe coding because we have this internal idea of aim small, miss small. When you're using it as an assistant to essentially complete your thoughts, save you keystrokes, auto complete your thoughts, very effective. When you say, I have an app and I want it to do these set of things, even if that's a small description, but you're asking it to do a big thing, the amount of hallucination there is so rampant. Oftentimes you'll get 60% more code than what you intended in your request. So it's doing all kinds of things to complete the app that you requested. If you're off, you're way off. That idea of aim small, miss small. Hey, I need a function that calculates the average of something, like, or I need a function that goes and gets this particular type of data. Those really small, precise assistance is really productive, but the tools and creating a larger body of work, there's going to be some cruft there. I love the idea of doing the habits for this purpose of greater joy. I want to go back to that because Thomas Aquinas is who you're doing most of your research on. There's a couple of things you mentioned in the assistance of habits to fulfill your purpose. The more we're in our purpose, the more we've defined our purpose and we're living in our purpose, then the more joy we would naturally have. In the virtues, do you find that most people assert those values to professional success rather than human success? know a lot of really successful guys and their family life is a mess. Their spiritual life is a mess. How are you seeing that balance between, I call it the four pillars: faith, family, fitness, and finance? How are you seeing your work and the work around habits tie into a balance across the four pillars, making sure that you're attacking the race of being human in a complete way rather than just targeting work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It all ties into the idea of joy or happiness. I don't know if you know the work of my friend and neighbor Arthur Brooks. It does a lot of work on happiness, has published and speaks a lot on the topic. He has a similar four: faith, family, in his case, friends, and then work. So, but it's similar to what you have. And you have to get all of those firing on all cylinders in order to actually be happy. And this is, I think, where virtue comes in. I mentioned that my research focused on Aquinas, but it's Aquinas combined with contemporary psychological science. There's a whole branch of psychology called positive psychology, which focuses on the virtues, on what they call character strengths. And what the ancient philosophers and positive psychologists agree on is that the more you grow in any of these virtues, the happier you become. The ancients said that as philosophers. The modern scientists have studied that. They survey people and so on. They find as you grow in gratitude, for example, you become happier. Gratitude is a fabulous one. In fact, there's a bunch of studies that show where they'll do a randomized control study where they'll have people growing in gratitude. And the way you do this is you keep a gratitude diary. Every day, at the end of the day or the beginning, you write down things you are grateful for. So the test group is keeping a gratitude diary, the control group is not. After a relatively short period, maybe a couple of months, 8 weeks, the folks who are keeping the gratitude diary, and there's nothing else different because there's a balanced sample, they are happier and actually healthier. They have lower levels of depression, lower levels of anxiety, lower levels of chronic pain, simply by becoming more grateful. Isn't that amazing? But it's not just gratitude. If you look across all these different virtues, all these different habits of excellence, you see that the science is almost boring. It's the same every time, where the more you grow in them, the happier and healthier you become. So there's a certain sense in which this is the way we are meant to live. We are meant to grow in these habits because when we do, everything just seems to work out better. To your question, talk about virtues, not values, because values are just ideas, whereas virtues are habits. So they're taking the ideas and turn them into practice. So I like to say that values are talking the talk, whereas virtues are walking the walk. The beauty of the virtues is they're both effective and ethical at all times. You can't separate the two. Courage, for example, is that the practical thing to do in business, to be courageous? Yes, of course. If you're not courageous, you're not going to try taking risks. Is it the right thing to do, to be courageous, to stand up for what is? Absolutely. Is courage a moral thing or a practical thing? It's both. The same for wisdom, the same for justice. They're always practical and ethical at the same time. As you grow in the virtues, they tend to spill over. So it's hard to be virtuous at work and not virtuous at home. Somebody who is honest at work is likely to be honest at home. Somebody who's courageous at work is likely to be courageous with his friends. So somebody who's self-disciplined at work is going to be self-disciplined with his finances. So the four F's grow together as you grow in these virtues. To pick another technology analogy, I like to think of the virtues as the human operating system. They underlie everything else we do. You could think of our skills as apps, but our virtues, the OS.
They are the rules in which our skills play. The skills would not have access to resources without them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. For me, it's why fitness matters so much. Daily fitness habit means that I will have the hard conversations at work with employees, that I pray, that I study the Bible. If the fitness habit is in check for a week, all the other habits will also fall in line. If the fitness habit is neglected, chances are most of the other habits are also going to be neglected. We call it a drift. A drift is a period of time where you're living out of alignment with who you say you are, with the person that you want to be. Essentially, it's a vacation from your habits, but actually leads to quite a bit of negative emotion. I don't think it's detectable of which comes which, the negative emotion or the drift and then the negative emotion, but it's not a good
Not the
cycle.
place.
And so then we talk about what are ways to get out of the drift. Some of those could be brute force. You just start doing the things that you say you would do. But that's when some of those things like talking to friends, bringing those things that are associated with the drift into the light. Gratitude, sitting down and what all are the things that I'm grateful? What are all the things that are going well? What am I hopeful about? not just gratitude for what's happening today, but what could happen tomorrow. I've had a gratitude journal for quite some time, and so I can totally relate to everything that you're saying. I've also learned this practice of feeling gratitude. So the practice is to just sit in a quiet room. I put my hand on my chest, my hand on my heart. Then I close my eyes and quiet my thoughts. Then I think of a specific memory or person or experience that I was really grateful. So it could have been right after a big accomplishment. And then I bring that memory closer in my vision and actually brighten the colors. I think about the color and the vividness of it. Most of the time, I'll have emotion, I'll have tears, I'll feel the gratitude. And I've watched other brothers that have this skill, and something really amazing will happen, and they'll just pause for a moment and connect their emotions with that truly good moment. I think this is an amazing habit to do. Not only the gratitude journal, I find that the gratitude journal can sometimes be a little, I'm really grateful for my wife, I'm really grateful for my kids, can be a little surfacey. A deeper meditation on a moment or a memory where I was truly grateful, and then to journal, I get higher quality statements of gratitude in the journal. Like, I really love that my wife reads her Bible every day. I really love that my wife asked me that direct conversation yesterday. I really love that she shared a resentment with me so we could work through that issue. I love that my daughter kissed me on the cheek last night, reflecting on truly grateful memories. I don't know if any of that brings up anything for you, but skill of gratitude is a missed skill. And so I wanted to touch on that a little deeper.
It is, and it actually goes very deep because what you're saying is actually very generalizable to everything that we're talking about, not just to the virtue of gratitude, but to all of them in this sense. Because what you're talking about is true integrity, right? Where your feelings and your thoughts and your actions are all integrated, that you're not just thinking grateful thoughts, you're feeling those thoughts. And that's true integrity, right? Where our whole self is united in that way. It's not our feelings going one way and our thoughts or desires going the other way. I was talking to my wife about this some time ago, and she said this virtue stuff, it's not primarily about doing good, it's primarily about feeling good. And I said, what do you mean? That sounds like some kind of pop psychology. She goes, what I mean by that, and I think it's exactly right. And I think you're hitting on the same thing, which is as you grow in these habits of excellence, whether it be gratitude or courage, in a sense, you are training your feelings to move in the right direction with you. So when you're having those quiet moments, bringing your feelings to bear on those memories of gratitude, you're basically saying to your feelings, I say by amplifying the colors, I think is a great example. You're teaching your feelings to rejoice in the things that should be rejoiced in. And the converse is when you take your ice bath, you're teaching your feelings not to worry about the things that you're not worried about. Like your feelings want to say, ice bath, terrible, get away. But you're saying, no, it's okay. I can deal with standing on the nails. So you're, in a sense, training your feelings to themselves be more human, which is interesting and somewhat controversial because some people think, well, feelings are feelings. I don't have any control of my feelings. I just have to follow them. And that's not true. And I'll go back to Aquinas. He gave this beautiful analogy. He says, our feelings are like wild horses and we're the charioteer. If you just let your feelings run, you're like letting the horses go wherever they want. They're probably going to trip over and you're going to die. But if you're the kind of person whose feelings are bad, I'm just going to squish them down. I'm going to stuff them in. That's like killing the horses or hamstringing them. That's dumb. You're not going to get anywhere. So the real thing is to coach the feelings, right? Coach them to rejoice when it's time to rejoice and to not be unhappy when something scary happens. What you're talking about is this school of becoming a whole human person and bringing all the parts of us that sometimes want to go haywire back into order, into integrity.
Yeah. I think a great example, and I'm going to use a more negative example. So the same thing is true with suicidal thoughts. We've all had them. At some point in time, we've all had a suicidal thought. If we said, oh, I've had suicidal thoughts tens of times in the last 90 days, then we need to probably go, oh,
Get help.
get help and let's
Yeah.
talk about this. But a lot of times it is a pattern of thought, and have that pattern of thought, the more that neural pathway is created. So something bad happens and we start to imagine the situation as if we weren't in it. That's actually sometimes a healthy thing. Oh, there's this disagreement. What if I weren't in the situation? What would happen without me here? Because that could give you some really objective arguments or some really objective postures. Hey, if I wasn't here, this would still be a problem. I'm actually here to help you. And so the fact that we're having conflict when I'm just trying to help you, like, puts me in a good position. But then if I carry that thought of what if I weren't here to what if I ended my life, it can just be a way that we are training our thoughts towards despair or towards depression. But I think if people realize that, hey, this is a thought pattern that's coming from negative situations, and then of course there is a certain percentage of people that have some chemical issues that need to seek more medical help. But I think oftentimes we treat a thought pattern that really just needs the self-discipline to say, hey, I'm not going to choose that thought pattern anymore. Instead, I'm going to choose the habit of, hey, what is something good that could come from something that I'm judging as bad in the moment? What's a positive that could come up from this? Hey, I have to let an employee go. They could go find a fantastic job. Or, hey, I was just let go of my job. Now I can figure out what I really want to do and find something even better. I think there's certain habits that go the other way. We either choose into gratitude or we can choose into despair. And the more we do it, the more that neural pathway gets reinforced.
So we talk about virtues, we could also talk about vices, which are the opposite, the bad habits, right? The virtues are the good habits of excellence, the vices are the bad ones. And the trick is to move away from the one towards the other.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to describe what I'm saying is that the suicidal thoughts almost become like a vice.
I think so. As you say, despair is a vice. In theological terms, you also have to allow for the fact that there's a spirit world as well, right? And so you could have what the Bible refers to as the devil, spirit, putting stuff into your head. Even for somebody who's an atheist, you have to observe and go, sometimes I get some really dumb thoughts in my head, like really dumb thoughts. Where did those come from? Do they all come from me? Am I that bad? Or is there some other malicious spirit putting them in my head to mess me up? I'm more inclined to believe the latter.
Yeah. Love it. So, what else did you want to say today or express about your work? I just want to make sure that we've been able to cover the things that you want to cover. I've really enjoyed this conversation, but I just want to give you the floor if there's anything else about your work that you think people should know.
Thank you. There's places they can go if they want to learn more. I mentioned the book Super Habit that's on Amazon. I also have a Substack, superhabit.substack.com, where I kind of delve into these in much more detail. There's also an app we've developed called Grow Virtue, which is AI generated. So you figure out which habit do I want to work on. It's more than a habit tracker, helping you choose which habit to focus on. But then it gives guidance and so on. But I guess I would close with just tying it back to business. We talked about the 4 cardinal virtues lining up with our thoughts, actions, fears, desires. They also map to the most important functions of running a business, whether you're a small startup or a large corporation. Practical wisdom for our thoughts, all about our strategic planning. The habit of making wise decisions means we do good strategy. Self-discipline is about execution. The habit of self-discipline means we'll execute well. The virtue of justice, the habit of treating others fairly, is going to underlie good employee and customer relationship. And then the virtue of courage, the habit of moving forward even though you're afraid, is going to underlie our innovation. Strategy, execution, relationships, innovation, 4 critical things for business success are tied to those 4 super habits or cardinal virtues. With the Grow Virtue app, you take a team or an organization and say, okay, we have a challenge in some certain area. The app does a diagnostic across the team and say, this is the particular virtue that's missing on this team. And then you have a series of activities to help develop that habit among the group so that they get better at innovation, customer service, or whatever key thing you're trying to change. So there's always so much more to be said, but I think we've really nailed the heart of it. This was a really rich discussion, I thought. So
Yeah. So, are you helping businesses become more virtuous organizations in this way?
yes, so long as we understand virtue is to mean excellent, not goody two shoes, right? Because sometimes people use the word virtue, think, no, we're talking about excellence in every way. So only a few months into this, so this is very new, but the research seems to suggest, and there's actually quite a bit of research, that as the employees grow in virtue, not only they become happier and more motivated, but it hits the top line and bottom line results as well. That's pretty exciting.
No, I think that's a great way to think of these virtues for these keys to excellence. And then as we think of that both interpersonally and professionally, we're creating a more excellent organization through those keys. I think that's fantastic. And what a cool way to think of it because it brings you back from the problem at hand just enough to then reassert it. What are our habits? Where's the courage that we need? And that's got to be fantastic. I would imagine as you move forward with this, it will bring you great joy to see the transformation that work could have on an organization. Even a 10% improvement in courage could mean the difference in a whole digital transformation or a whole assessment of risk that now the whole team is getting behind because, hey, we're going to be a courageous organization. The way you would approach change just by focusing on courage could be amplified. That's really cool how you applied it to business, and excited to see what you do with this just being a couple months in, because I think it's very valuable.
Thank you.
Cool. If people liked what you shared and wanted to reach out to you, where should they go?
Best place to find me is probably on LinkedIn, Andrew Abela or Dean Abela, Bush School of Business, and they can just reach out, connect, follow on LinkedIn.
Great. And then who specifically do you want to be speaking to on LinkedIn? Who do you really want to connect with? Because if that person is listening, I want to make sure that they know you want to talk to them.
If you are a middle or senior manager or an entrepreneur with an organization where you're having difficulty with some kind of behavior you're trying to get to and not getting there. So I need more innovation, or I need more disciplined execution or whatever, and you're struggling and you can't figure out what, that's who I'd like to talk to, because I think this is where this virtue work and the app technology can actually really help.
Great. Love it. Thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and being with us here today. I think this was a great episode and hope to see what you do with your work. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.